I always thought that if my marriage ever fell apart, it would be because of something dramatic. A fiery argument, a tragic misunderstanding, or maybe even me deciding to buy a motorcycle and relive my non-existent rebellious youth. You know, something grand. Turns out, the beginning of the end of my marriage started with a cat. Not our cat. We didn't have a cat. Maria always said she was allergic, though now that I think about it, I never actually saw her sneeze around one. But there it was, a very smug-looking orange tabby, sitting on our kitchen counter like it owned the place. Now, I'm not an expert in feline behavior, but I was pretty sure cats didn't just appear in people's homes like poorly thought-out magic tricks. Maria wasn't home. It was my day off, and I had planned to spend it doing absolutely nothing, something I had been perfecting into an art form. Instead, I spent the next few minutes in a silent stare-down with the intruder. "Well," I finally muttered, "you're new." The cat yawned, clearly unimpressed by my ability to state the obvious. I took a slow lap around the house, half expecting to find some kind of explanation. A note, a carrier, a box labeled "Free Cat, Enjoy." Nothing. Just an unfamiliar pet making itself at home like it had been here all along. Maybe Maria had taken in a stray? No, that wasn't her style. She once made me return a free sample at the grocery store because she said we weren't technically going to buy the product. No way was she adopting an entire living creature without an 8-step decision-making process. So that left two options. Option 1. The cat had wandered in on its own. Possible, but unlikely, considering we lived in an apartment with doors that, last I checked, required opposable thumbs to open. Option 2. Someone had brought it in. Someone comfortable enough in my home to let themselves inside, plop a cat on my kitchen counter, and then leave. The thought sat in my stomach like a bad diner meal. I turned back to the cat. "So, do I call you Exhibit A? Or do you have a name?" It stared at me for a beat before lazily licking its paw. Yeah, this was going to be one of those days. I was still staring at the cat when Maria walked in like nothing was weird about this situation. No hesitation, no surprise, just a casual, "Oh, you're home early," as she set her bag down. "Yeah," I said, crossing my arms. "And so, apparently is this." I pointed at the cat, which, despite having zero investment in my marriage, had made itself comfortable in Maria's spot on the couch. She barely glanced at it. "Oh, that's Richard's cat." Now, I don't claim to be the most emotionally intelligent man in the world, but even I knew that was not a name you want to hear in your wife's explanation of why there's a cat in your home. "Richard," I repeated. "And who exactly is Richard?" She waved a hand like I had asked her to explain the mechanics of a microwave. "A friend from work. He went on a business trip and needed someone to watch his cat. I told him I could do it for a few days." I stared at her, then at Richard's cat, then back at her. "That's funny, because we don't have a cat. Or, at least, we didn't yesterday. And also, because I don't remember agreeing to live with Richard's cat." She sighed, the universal sign of a woman who had already decided the conversation was over, even though the conversation was very much not over. "It's just for a few days, Logan. I didn't think I needed to run every little thing by you." "Every little thing," I repeated, like secretly taking in a fully grown animal from a man I've never heard of. Her face did this thing where she acted like I was the one being ridiculous. I knew that look well. It usually came up when I asked why we needed another decorative pillow, or why our garage was still full of boxes from when we moved in 5 years ago. "You're making it a bigger deal than it is," she said, already heading to the bedroom. "It's just a cat, Logan." But it wasn't. Because here's the thing. Maria is not a cat person. She has made this fact painfully clear over the years. The only time she has ever willingly touched a cat was to remove it from her car when a neighborhood stray decided to nap on the hood. So now, suddenly, she's just offering free cat-sitting services? For a guy she's never mentioned before? Something wasn't adding up. Still, I dropped it, for the moment. I was married, not stupid. If I kept pushing, she'd turn it into me being difficult, and I'd spend the rest of the night in a one-sided debate about how I should be more open-minded about temporary house guests. I sat down across from Richard's cat, which was now licking itself in a way that felt unnecessarily smug. "All right, buddy," I muttered. "Let's see what else you brought with you." The next morning, Maria left for work as usual, and I decided to do a little light investigation. Not the Sherlock Holmes type, more the husband trying to figure out why his wife suddenly adopted someone else's pet without discussions type. I started with the basics. The cat had a collar, which seemed like a reasonable place to start. I expected a tag that said, Richard's cat, or maybe an address. What I found instead was a tiny engraved plate with a phone number. Interesting. I pulled out my phone and dialed. A man picked up almost immediately. Hello? Hey, I said, going for the casual approach. I think I have your cat. There was a pause. I don't have a cat. Now that was not the answer I was expecting. I said, glancing at the orange fur ball. Are you sure? Because there's a very confident cat sitting in my house, right now with your number on its collar. Listen, buddy, I don't know who you are, but I don't own a cat. The guy sounded genuinely confused, maybe a little annoyed. Where did you say you found it? I hesitated. My wife brought it home. Another pause. Then, in a tone that made my stomach drop, the guy asked, Your wife's name wouldn't happen to be Maria, would it? And that's when I knew. I didn't have all the details yet, but I had enough. Yeah, I said, my mouth suddenly dry. Yeah, it is. The line went silent for a second. Then, very carefully, the man sighed and said, Listen, man, we should probably talk. There are moments in life where you realize you've been thrown into a situation you are completely unprepared for, like being asked to give a speech at a wedding when you thought you were just there for the free bar. This was one of those moments. Alan, the man on the other end of the call, had just asked if my wife's name was Maria. That wasn't a casual question. That was the kind of question that came with answers I wasn't going to like. I took a breath. Yeah, Maria. You know her? There was a long pause. That special kind of silence where you can feel the other person deciding how much they actually want to say. When he finally spoke, his voice had that tired tone of a man who had seen some things and regretted all of them. Yeah, he said. I know her. The weight of those 3 words sat heavy between us. I ran a hand through my hair, feeling the kind of irritation that only comes when you're about to find out just how much of an idiot you've been. Okay, Alan, let's cut the suspense. How exactly do you know my wife? And why does your phone number happen to be on a cat that she swears belongs to a Richard? Alan let out a humorless chuckle, the kind that told me I wasn't going to like where this conversation was headed. Well, he said, for starters, there is no Richard. I blinked. I'm sorry, what? No Richard. Never was. If she told you the cat belongs to Richard, she's lying. I stared at the cat, which was now staring right back at me like it had been waiting for this exact moment to confirm that it was, in fact, a living piece of evidence. So if there's no Richard, then whose cat is this? Mine, Alan said. I took a second to process that. Alan, the man who somehow knew my wife well enough to recognize her name without hesitation. The man whose phone number was on this mystery cat's collar. The man who had just, with absolutely no dramatic build-up, dropped the information that my wife had very casually stolen his pet. Why do we have your cat? That, Alan said, is an excellent question, Logan. One I was hoping you could answer. I had a growing suspicion that neither of us was going to like the answer. I pinched the bridge of my nose, already feeling the oncoming headache. Look, Alan, I don't know what's going on here, but maybe we should meet in person. Where are you? He hesitated, and when he spoke again, there was something cautious in his voice. You sure about that? No, not even a little. But I was sure I wasn't about to keep having this conversation over the phone while staring at a cat that, for all I knew, was the only honest thing in my entire house. Yeah, I said. Where do you want to meet? Alan sighed. You know the little bookstore on Oak Street? The one with the weird coffee shop that only serves tea? I did. Maria had dragged me there once under the false promise that they had good coffee. They did not. Yeah, I know it. Meet me there in an hour. Fine. I hung up and looked at the cat. It blinked at me, completely unbothered. Well, I muttered. Guess we're going to a bookstore. I walked into the shop and spotted Alan immediately. He was sitting at a small corner table, arms crossed, looking like a man who had exactly 0 patience left for whatever nonsense had brought him here. He was around my age, maybe a little older, with the general vibe of someone who had once been very optimistic about life, but had since been corrected. He glanced up as I approached, gave me a look that said, "Yep, I figured it was you," and gestured to the seat across from him. "So," I said as I sat down, "you want to tell me why I suddenly have your cat?" Alan leaned back, studying me for a second like he was trying to figure out just how much I already knew. "Logan, right?" "Yep." He exhaled sharply. "All right, Logan. Here's the thing. Your wife and I have history." There it was. The sentence that changed everything. I didn't react immediately. I just sat there, letting the words settle, waiting to see if my brain would reject them like a bad meal. It didn't. "History," I repeated slowly. "That's a real interesting way of saying something that's definitely going to make me angry." Alan looked like he agreed but wasn't thrilled about it. "Look, man, I don't know what she told you, but she and I were together for a while." I didn't even blink. "When?" "A few years ago." A cold, creeping feeling settled into my chest. "You dated my wife before we were married?" Alan gave me a long, unreadable look. "No, Logan. We were together while she was married." I could actually feel my last shred of patience snap like an old rubber band. I let out a slow breath, tapping my fingers on the table. Okay. So what? She cheated on me with you." "Yeah," Alan admitted. "For about a year." "A year? A whole year? And the cat?" I asked, because at this point, that felt like the least insane part of this conversation. Alan actually looked mildly embarrassed. "Yeah, so, the cat was originally mine. When she and I broke things off, I moved out, but she kept the cat. Guess she decided to pass it off as belonging to some made-up guy instead of admitting she took it from me." I stared at him. "You mean to tell me my wife has been keeping your cat this entire time and just never mentioned it?" Alan shrugged. "Apparently." I leaned back, rubbing my face with both hands. "This is the dumbest thing that has ever happened to me." "Yeah," Alan said dryly. "That sounds about right." I dropped my hands and looked him straight in the eye. "Is she still cheating on me?" Alan hesitated just long enough for me to know the answer before he said it. "I don't know." And just like that, I realized I had two choices. I could go home and pretend I didn't just have this conversation. Pretend that my wife wasn't a liar, that my marriage wasn't one grand joke at my expense, that I wasn't sitting in a bookstore cafe getting the worst news of my life from a man whose cat was now apparently part of my household. Or, I could figure out just how deep this mess went. I looked at Alan. "How much do you actually know?" He sighed, looking like he regretted picking up the phone earlier. "Enough. You really want the full story?" "Oh, I wanted the full story. I just wasn't sure I was ready to hear it." Alan leaned back in his chair, giving me the look of a man who had already lost all hope in humanity and was now just waiting to see how badly things could still go wrong. I appreciated the energy because I was currently in the exact same place. "So," I said, drumming my fingers on the table, "Maria had an affair with you. For a year. While she was married to me." Alan nodded. "Yep. And then you broke up?" "Correct. And instead of telling me the truth, she stole your cat and renamed it Richard's cat to cover her tracks? That about sums it up." I stared at him for a long moment, just letting the sheer absurdity of the situation settle into my brain. This wasn't just regular cheating. This was theater production-level cheating, complete with props, supporting characters, and a plot so ridiculous it deserved a terrible Netflix adaptation. I sighed, leaning back. "All right, Alan. Go ahead. Tell me the rest." Alan rubbed his face like a man who had been waiting for this moment, but wasn't exactly thrilled about it. "Look, I don't know what she's been telling you all these years, but Maria, she's got a habit, man. I found out the hard way." "A habit?" I repeated. "You mean like she regularly picks up hobbies and quits them? Or you mean she cheats like it's a seasonal sport?" Alan gave me a look that told me I already knew the answer. "The second one." I let that sit for a second, staring at the wall like it might suddenly provide me with a better reality. "Fantastic," I muttered. "Go on." Alan shrugged. "We got together a few years ago. It started out fun. Real easy. I wasn't thinking much about it at first. Thought it was casual. Thought I was just helping her out of a bad marriage." I frowned. "Helping her?" "Yeah, That's what she told me. That she was stuck in a marriage with some distant, cold husband who barely paid attention to her. I blinked. Oh wow, that's cute. She made me sound like an emotionally unavailable bank account, didn't she? Alan actually had the nerve to look slightly guilty. Yeah, pretty much. She played it real well. Made it seem like you were just a guy who worked too much, didn't care about what she needed, and was basically just there out of convenience. I laughed. A short, humorless thing. That's impressive. Genuinely. Considering I was busting my ass to make sure we had a nice life, taking care of everything she needed, and, oh yeah, not sleeping around like an idiot. Alan rubbed the back of his neck. Yeah, man. I don't blame you for being mad. I'm not mad, I said. I'm fascinated. It's like watching a scam documentary where you realize just how dumb the victims were. Except the victim is me, and the documentary is my actual life. Alan sighed. Look, I didn't know at first. Thought it was just a sad woman looking for an escape. But after a few months, I started noticing things. The way she talked about her past relationships, how they all ended with her being the victim, how every single guy she'd been with was some awful, neglectful person who didn't give her enough attention. I frowned. She said that about me? Yep. Said you never really saw her. That you were always focused on work, didn't appreciate her, didn't make her feel wanted. I tilted my head. That's interesting. Because when I planned our anniversary trip last year, she said she felt suffocated and needed space. Alan snorted. Yeah, that tracks. I shook my head. Unbelievable. So what happened? Why'd you two end things? Alan sighed, looking genuinely exhausted at just the memory. She started getting weird. I noticed she was keeping her options open, talking to other guys, always finding excuses to go out with friends, but never really explaining who. The moment I started questioning things, she flipped, said I was being possessive, that I was just like all the others. I chuckled. Let me guess, every time you asked something reasonable, she made it seem like you were the problem? Alan nodded. Bingo. So I did some digging. And, well, let's just say I wasn't the only guy she was escaping with. I raised an eyebrow. Meaning? Meaning she had at least two others while she was with me. I exhaled slowly, looking up at the ceiling, as if that might stop the growing headache forming behind my eyes. So, let me get this straight. While I was at home, thinking I had a normal marriage, Maria was out here running a full-scale relationship Ponzi scheme. Pretty much. I rubbed my face. Okay, so when you found out, you broke up with her? Yeah. Told her I wasn't interested in playing whatever game she was running. And the cat? Alan sighed. That was supposed to be my cat. When I left, I figured I'd come back and get him later. But she told me not to bother, that she was keeping him. She said something about how she needed something to remember me by. I narrowed my eyes. She needed something to remember you by? But somehow, I ended up with the cat? Yeah, that part doesn't make sense to me either. I sat back, exhaling slowly. Alan, do you know if she's seeing someone else right now? Alan shook his head. I don't know, man. But if I had to guess, probably. I nodded, running through my mental list of every weird behavior Maria had been displaying lately. The late nights, the sudden secrecy, the way she always seemed just a little too defensive whenever I asked simple questions. It all lined up. So what are you gonna do? Alan asked. I drummed my fingers on the table, thinking. Well, Alan, first things first, your cat is officially mine now. Consider that my severance package for enduring this conversation. Alan laughed. Fair enough. And second, I continued, standing up, I think it's about time I have a little chat with my wife. The walk back home wasn't long, but it was just enough time for me to cycle through about 40 different ways this conversation with Maria could go. There was the classic calm and collected approach, where I'd sit her down and logically dismantle every lie she had ever told me. There was the passive-aggressive route, where I'd start casually bringing up cat-related topics until she cracked under the weight of her own stupidity. And then there was my personal favorite, the make her as uncomfortable as possible method, which involved the strategic use of silence, well-timed smirks, and letting her dig her own grave one excuse at a time. By the time I reached the apartment, I had decided on a combination of all three. I walked in, and there she was, sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone like a woman who hadn't spent the last several years running a relationship pyramid scheme. She barely glanced up. "Hey, where were you?" I smiled. "Bookstore." She frowned, finally looking at me. "You? At a bookstore?" "Yep." I set my keys down and stretched. "Met a guy named Alan. Really interesting guy. Apparently, he knows you." I have to give her credit. She didn't react right away. No wide eyes, no sudden gasps, no dropping the phone in horror. But I did notice the subtle way she adjusted her posture, like someone who had just realized the test they didn't study for was happening right now. "Alan?" she repeated, her voice carefully casual. "Yep. Tall guy. Kinda tired looking. Spent a year of his life making the unfortunate mistake of dating a married woman. You know, you." Now there was a reaction. Just the faintest tightening around her jaw, the kind you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it, which I absolutely was. "That's crazy," she said, forcing a laugh. "Why would he say that?" "Oh, I don't know," I said, taking a seat across from her. "Maybe because it's true. Maybe because you told him I was some emotionally distant husband who neglected you. Maybe because he found out he wasn't even the only guy you were playing at the time." Maria let out a short breath through her nose, like she was already exhausted with the conversation. "Logan, seriously? You're believing some random guy over your own wife?" I nodded. "Yep," she scoffed, tossing her phone onto the couch. "Wow, real great husband you are. And real great wife you are." I shot back, smiling. "You know, since we're throwing compliments around." Maria's eyes narrowed. "So what? You think I've just been lying to you this whole time?" I shrugged. "Not just to me. To Alan, too. And probably to Richard." Her expression flickered. "Who's Richard?" I grinned. "Oh, that's right. Richard doesn't exist. My mistake. I meant your elaborate, imaginary excuse for stealing Alan's cat." Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. That's not true." "Really?" I gestured toward the cat, which was currently perched on the armrest, looking as completely unbothered as ever. "Because Alan says that's his cat. And, fun fact, the name on the collar? His phone number. Not Richard's. Because, again, Richard is a myth you invented to cover your own stupidity." Maria pressed her lips together, as if mentally weighing her options. Then she sighed dramatically, shaking her head. "You know what? I don't have to listen to this. If you want to believe some bitter ex over your own wife, then go ahead." I smiled wider. "Oh, Maria, you still don't get it, do you? I don't have to believe anything. I already know." She exhaled sharply. "Fine. Let's say, hypothetically, that Alan and I were together for a little while. That was years ago, Logan. It doesn't matter anymore." I nodded. "Sure. Just like it didn't matter when you were seeing two other guys at the same time as Alan." Her head snapped up, eyes finally widening in a way that told me she hadn't realized just how much I knew. There it was. I leaned back, stretching my arms behind my head. "So, Maria, would you like to keep lying to my face? Or would you like to tell me exactly how long you've been doing this?" For the first time in what was probably her entire professional cheating career, she didn't have a response. Good. Now came the fun part. I stood up, dusting imaginary lint off my shirt. "Anyway, now that we've got that settled, let's talk next steps." She blinked. "What?" "Well," I said, moving toward the door. "Since you apparently love variety so much, I figured it's only fair I give you some options." Her eyes narrowed. "What options?" I grinned. "Oh, just a little something I've been working on. You'll see soon enough." And with that, I walked out, because Maria had spent years playing her little games. Now, it was my turn. Maria always thought she was the smartest person in the room. That was her first mistake. Her second mistake was assuming that I was just going to roll over and accept the fact that my entire marriage had been a discount soap opera. I had no intention of crying about this. No dramatic speeches, no teary confessions. No, Maria had spent years playing people like a rigged casino game. It was only fair that she finally got to experience what it felt like to be on the losing end. So I got to work. Step 1. Housekeeping. Now, technically speaking, Maria and I both had our names on the lease. But here's the fun thing. My name was the one actually paying for the place. The utilities? My bank account. The Wi-Fi she spent hours scrolling through Instagram on? My name. Every single bill? Me. Maria contributed exactly one thing to our household. An impressive ability to ignore basic morality. So, before I even went back home, I made a few calls. First, to our landlord, letting him know that Maria would be moving out by the end of the month. Then, to our internet provider, informing them that the account would be canceled immediately due to a sudden lack of interest in funding my wife's extracurricular activities. The electricity? Scheduled for a mysterious service disruption in exactly 5 days. Maria, I decided, would be getting an abrupt lesson in what happens when the man she's been using decides to stop financing her lifestyle. Step 2. Social announcements. Maria thrived on social perception. She loved being the woman that people envied, the strong, independent type who, in reality, was less independent and more dependent on her ability to lie convincingly. Well, I figured it was about time for a reality check. So I did what any responsible, mature adult would do. I changed my relationship status to single. Now, for some people, that wouldn't mean much. But for Maria, that was DEFCON 1. Her entire online persona was built around our perfect relationship. The Instagram posts, the anniversary photos, the occasional long-winded caption about how marriage is a journey. So imagine her horror when half of our mutual friends started commenting with concerned, confused messages. And then, just to make things more interesting, I posted a very polite, very factual update. Hey everyone, just a quick life update. Maria and I are separating. Won't go into details, but let's just say I found out I wasn't the only one she was married to. Thanks to everyone who's reached out. Appreciate the support. It took exactly 20 minutes before my phone started blowing up with messages from friends and family. Some were shocked. Some weren't surprised at all, which was its own kind of revelation. And some were more than happy to start sharing their own little suspicions about Maria's behavior. Step 3. The workplace surprise. Maria worked in HR, a job that, under normal circumstances, would require someone with ethics. So I figured her boss might be interested in a small piece of information, namely, that she had been romantically involved with at least 2 coworkers while actively pushing company policies about workplace professionalism. Now, I wasn't trying to get her fired. That would be petty. I was simply sharing valuable, work-related feedback. Step 4. The cat situation. Alan, to his credit, had been surprisingly chill about the whole thing. I called him up and said, "Hey, you want your cat back?" And Alan, ever the reasonable man, said, "I don't want anything from that woman, but I'll take the cat because, it's mine." So, I left the door open and let the cat make its choice. It didn't take long. That little orange trader immediately walked out and into Alan's car without a second glance. Step 5. The grand finale. I walked back into the apartment and found Maria pacing, her phone clutched in her hand like she was waiting for an emergency broadcast announcement. She looked up the second she saw me. "What did you do?" she demanded. I smiled. "Oh, I don't know, Maria. I just made some choices." She glared. "Logan, this is ridiculous. You're blowing this out of proportion. It was just a mistake." I tilted my head. "Oh, which part? The part where you cheated on me for years, or the part where you thought you were too smart to get caught?" She folded her arms. "You're acting childish." "Am I?" I checked my phone. "Because according to your boss's latest email, you might need to start looking for a new job soon." Her face drained of color. "You. Oh, and by the way," I continued, "you have about 3 weeks to figure out where you're going to live because, spoiler alert, I'm not paying for your apartment anymore." Maria's jaw clenched. "You can't just kick me out." I shrugged. "Sure I can. The lease is under my name. The bills? My name. The Wi-Fi you used to talk to your other boyfriends? Oh, definitely my name." She opened her mouth, then closed it. "You're being petty." I grinned. "And you're being evicted." For the first time in her entire professional cheating career, Maria looked like she didn't have a way out. She inhaled sharply. "Fine. You want to be a jerk? I'll move out. I don't need you, Logan." "That's the spirit," I said cheerfully. "And hey, if you ever need another pet to steal, Might I suggest a goldfish? Less drama. Maria let out a frustrated noise, grabbed her keys, and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I stood there for a second, enjoying the newfound peace and quiet of my Maria-free home. Then, I pulled out my phone and texted Alan. Cat's coming your way. Woman's out of my house. Thanks for the info, man. Alan replied 5 seconds later. Glad to hear it. That cat deserves better. So did I. I tossed my phone onto the couch, exhaled, and finally, for the first time in years, felt like I could actually breathe. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel